Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So I'm excited today to wish you all a happy Easter. And so as you guys start trickling in, tell me where you're watching. I guess it'll pop up your name here. And we're going to be giving away a copy of Holiness to the Lord today. If you're one of the I didn't have very many people. I got to mix that up better. Enter the contest. But I'm going to be giving away this book right here, Holiness to the Lord. If you saw the first episode, I gave Jonathan Stapley a Best Temple Book Award. And I'm going to be giving away this to one of you guys today. I probably should wait till more people get here. But, yeah, go ahead and comment there. I'm excited today to share. So I had to tell you a really strange and cool experience that I had last week. I kind of posted about it on Facebook, and I'm trying to decide if I should start my presentation right away or if I should wait for it. Looks like we've got a few people that are trickling in. And maybe I'll just, because it's kind of part of my presentation as well. And we'll save the book giveaway for later when more people are here. And so, let's see. I think I'm getting smarter about doing this. And there it is. Happy Orthodox Easter. So, I think you guys can see that. And by the way, I should ask if you guys can hear me well. Hopefully you can. If you can't hear me well, please let me know in the chat, and I'll hopefully change my microphones. But at any rate, so last Sunday, maybe I should go to the next slide, and then I'll come back to this one a little bit. So let's see here. Why isn't it going? Probably, here we go. So last Sunday, I met this Daniel, I don't know if he said it's Michalski or Michalski, and, oh, my logo is in front of my head. That's all right. You know what I look like. And, oh, good. Thank you, Deb, for letting me know. Deb says, hello from Iowa. You sound good. Thank you for letting me know. I'm glad to hear that. So this Daniel Michalski, I should have asked him how to say his name. I never did. So it was interesting. He told me he was driving out from California and he wanted to visit two churches. One of them was the House of Aaron, which, if you remember, for those long-time listeners, House of Aaron is kind of a Mormon church. They're kind of Messianic Christians. They no longer believe in the Book of Mormon, but they kind of have some Mormon roots. I talked to, oh my goodness, I can't remember his name. I see his face. I can't remember his name. But anyway, they meet on Saturday because they observe the seventh day as the Sabbath day. And so he went and visited them, which is like probably 3 hours from where I live. And so he did that on Saturday. And then Sunday, which was LDS Easter Sunday, and also Conference Sunday, he wanted to go visit the Nielsen Naylor group in Bluffdale. And so I met him in between conference sessions and discovered that, oh, there's nowhere I can put this, or maybe I'll do this. Maybe that'll look a little bit better. And found out he has some Jewish ancestry, and he's a member of the Coptic Orthodox Church. And I said, oh, Coptic, I don't know really anything, although I've learned a few things, especially since talking with Daniel about the Coptic Church. And then I got it in my head that that I should find out more about the Coptic Church, and found out there's one in Clearfield, Utah, which is about an hour north of me. And so we showed up, me and my son, showed up at the Coptic Church. And so unlike, oh, I'm so glad to see this here. I'm talking about him. Polish Neophyte. Did I say your name right, Daniel? Is it Michalski or Michalski? I don't know. Here from San Diego. So thank you so much. I told him I was doing this, but I'm glad he's here. So Daniel, please feel free to correct me if I say anything wrong, because I've been like in the last week, I've tried to learn as much as I can about the Coptic Church. And I will even say I taught priesthood today and showed everybody your picture. And as well as the, I'm saying it wrong. It's Michalski. Okay, thank you. I said it wrong both ways. Michalski, thank you. So at any rate, we went up there to so here's the weird thing. So Daniel warned me that the Coptic Orthodox Church is they started. Well, I don't know if he told me that, but they have 3-hour church. But on Easter, I assumed that this morning would be their Easter service, and I'm glad I messaged Daniel, and and he said, "Oh no, it's a Saturday night service on Easter weekend," and so we went for about a half hour into the service. So the interesting thing, I was expecting it to be very Catholic, and it wasn't Catholic. It kind of was, but not really. Like, it wasn't Catholic. I was expecting it to be more like Episcopal, maybe, because I've been to Episcopal, but it wasn't. So one of the cool things about, and so maybe I'll go back to my original slide, my title slide here, if I can figure out how to work my thing here, so this is what it looked like inside, and it's a very small, I mean, the chapel was pretty good size, but so Daniel sent me a thing that said it started at 7, and I thought, so I got there at 7, and there was nobody in the parking lot, not a soul. And so then I looked it up on Facebook, and it says it started at 8. So I was like, oh, well, me and my son can go. We went to Kentucky Fried Chicken and for an hour. And we came back, and here's the weird thing. We got there at, I remember it was like 7:50, so I thought we were 10 minutes early. There were only 5 cars in the parking lot, and but it looked like, even though I was 10 minutes early, it looked like they'd already started the service. I don't know why. But anyway, so we came in. And so one of the interesting things, I don't think I have any pictures. So I was sitting probably about halfway back in the chapel. And I remember this woman greeted us, and then me and my son, we were the only 3 people there at 7:50, which was 10 minutes before. And it looked like the service was underway. I think they started a little bit earlier for some reason. But anyway, so it was a 4-hour service, and on the left side, which you can't see here on this picture, I probably should have showed some more pictures, but they had these TV screens. Well, they had them on the right side too, but it was closer to me because I was on the left side of the chapel, that had what they were saying in English, and then in the middle was Coptic, which looks kind of Greek, and then on the right was Arabic. And so so Daniel told me that the Coptic Church has a pope, and so the leader of the pope is in Alexandria, Egypt. And so anyway, so we kind of, I mean, they were doing a lot. So sometimes they would switch into English, and it was really kind of a sing-songy. And in fact, my son kept saying, especially because they were speaking Arabic, or I think they were speaking Arabic. I'm pretty sure they were speaking Arabic. That he's like, I feel like I'm in a Muslim church. But it was very Christian. You know, they were talking about Jesus and the resurrection, and you know, there was some scriptures that we were familiar with, and some other stuff that we weren't as familiar with. And my son, about a half hour later, was like, I'm done. And so he wanted to go sit in the car. So, but I was like, no, I'm staying for the long haul. And he stayed for an hour. And then I stayed for about another hour. And then I felt bad and I left. I kind of wanted to stay for the whole thing, but I felt bad. My son was sitting in the car by himself. He was fine. He was playing video games on his phone. But anyway, this is kind of what it looked like. So the coolest part of the service, of this Easter service, so the Easter service goes an extra hour. So you can see in the middle back here, there's an altar behind the priest. That's the Father I can't remember his name, but there's an altar back here. And then they drew this curtain. You can kind of see the curtain right there. They drew the curtain, and then they turned out all the lights. And then they so they had a TV camera, and I remember because the monitors switched to, say, Apple TV, so that we could see. So even though the chapel was dark, there were some lights, which I assume represents the tomb of Jesus, I guess. I mean, they weren't speaking English, so I don't exactly know. And so Daniel, excuse me, please help me out here, because I'm guessing, because I don't speak Coptic or Arabic. But so they had this altar back there, and then they had these blankets, and they kept lifting up the blankets. And then it looked to me like there was like 4 blankets or something. They got to like a bed of roses, and then he kind of got the rose petals away from, and then underneath the bottom was a painting of Christ. And so then he kind of cleaned the painting, and then I remember it had plastic on it, so then he took out the plastic, and then they kind of marched around the altar about 3 times, and then they came out into the congregation. And I think I have, and I was like, can we record this? Hopefully. And I saw some people with their phones, and so I was like, okay, I'm doing this, so hopefully I don't get in trouble for this. But anyway, so this is kind of the processional after they've come out. And, did I share the sound? I bet I did not share the sound. And I want you to hear the sound so that you get an idea. Very, very good. So Daniel, if I can figure out how to make my mouse work, says, an icon of Christ is buried in roses earlier in Holy Week. Okay. And then, so thank you for that. I'm going to unshare, because I'm pretty sure I always forget to properly share my screen with the sound. Oh, it does say share the sound, so I did it right this time. And so you'll be able to hear this. And I just recorded, this is like 30 seconds. It's not very long. But this is, and so they kind of marched around the congregation. By the way, when I left about 2 hours after the meeting started, there were probably about 20 people in the congregation. So very small congregation. But here, this is, I think, I'm not entirely sure, but this is like right after Christ is resurrected, and you'll see here in a moment, they've got a painting, and the guy's going to be walking backwards. He's in front of the priest walking backwards, and on the painting is Christ, but you can't see it in my video very well. So here we go. Maybe if I can press the start button properly. But at any rate, so, and I didn't want to keep recording there, but you can kind of see what the inside of the church looks like, and so, so that was kind of cool. So, so I didn't show this video on my. I gave a lesson today at church. I didn't show this part, but I actually showed President Uchtdorf talking about Easter. Instead of this in my lesson, but yeah, it was really interesting. I wish I could have stayed the whole 4 hours, but I was proud of my son for going, but I felt bad because he he wasn't as excited to be there as I was. So, thank you, Daniel. He's given some more great comments here. It is wrapped in the cloth, then 2 candles are put on either side of it. It is taken out and processed after the lights are turned on Easter. It's then the smaller icon in the procession. Okay, yeah. So kind of hard to follow because, well, the other thing was you can kind of see this guy right here. Sorry, over here. He's got cymbals, and so That's not something that you see in an LDS church, that's for sure. But yeah, it was definitely a fun experience, funner for me than it was for my son. But I'm a nerd, so what can I say? So anyway, so I started this. In fact, the funny thing, I was talking to the guy in the bishopric this morning, and I told him I went to a Coptic church, and he's like, "What's a Coptic church?" And so I had to explain to him. So I did find out a few things. Maybe I'll save that for later. I will share this really quickly. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder, maybe if I play this again, it will have sound. I'm going to see if this has sound this time. Nope. So I thought it would be interesting. There's a movie, and it's probably at least 20 years old now, a film. It was a PBS film, Frontline, and it was called The First Christians. And so I thought it was fantastic, and I wanted to talk about from Christ to Constantine. In the LDS Church, we talk about the Great Apostasy. I think we should maybe refer to it as the resilience of Christianity. We have the empty cross on the left, and then the empty tomb in the middle, and then Constantine. I had AI help me create this slide. I thought I did a really good job. I was impressed. Like, I am not this kind of a graphic artist, that's for dang sure. But Constantine has the vision, and I believe that this is Latin. I hope, in hoc signo vinces. I don't speak Latin. And but the words are in, let's see, by this conquer. And Zelig, oh, that's interesting. Zelig went to an Eritrean Orthodox Easter last night. Oh, so they're kind of a sister church of the Coptic Orthodox Church. We rang in the resurrection at 3 a.m. Oh my gosh. Then the wedding feast, all music, chanting. Yeah, definitely there was a lot of music and chanting. It was funny because I had been to an Easter service at the Episcopal Church, and I knew, well, I thought it would be like that, because I know at the Episcopal Church they would say, like, you would have a program, it was very scripted, and the priest or whoever was up conducting the meeting would read some scriptures, and then the audience would all rise, and we would read scriptures together, and we had candles. I expected candles, but they had basically electric candles, so they didn't hand out any candles at the Coptic Church. But I think they do at other Coptic churches. But yeah, let's see, how much do I want to share about the Coptic Church? I want to share because I will forget if I don't do it now. So the Coptic Church broke off in 451 AD, which is, so most people are familiar with the Orthodox and then the Roman Catholic Church break off in about 1054. So this was 500 years before that, when the Coptic Church broke off. I was trying to understand, and Daniel tried to explain this to me, and I was like, I don't understand the difference. I got on YouTube last night, and it said something like, the big dispute in 450 was the Council of Chalcedon, and it was on the nature of Christ. Is he completely human or completely God? And it came down to a preposition. One side said, if I remember right, that Jesus was of God and man, and the other side said in God and man. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like a big difference to me. And basically the conclusion of the video was, it was a big deal in 450. It's not a big deal anymore. But yes, that's basically why the church split, because I was like, I don't even know what the difference is. So anyway, but yeah, so, in the LDS Church, we talk about the Great Apostasy. And so I thought, well, this would be interesting to talk about, what happened. Like, as far as LDS missionaries, especially, we know we're pretty good. In fact, I even said this. I said, of all people who are their knowledge of the Bible, LDS actually ranked number 3 as far as best knowledge of the Bible. So the two that beat us, number 1, are atheists, which I think is really strange, but whatever. Atheists apparently know more about the Bible than anybody else. Number 2 were Jewish people, and then number 3 were LDS. And so I was like, so of the Christian groups, LDS are number 1. We know more about the Bible. We know a lot about like Holy Week and Jesus and the resurrection and that sort of thing. And then, Constantine, 300-400 years later, and then we don't really know what happened in between. And so I thought it would be fun to talk about what happened in between. And so I don't know how well my lesson went over. I think a lot of people are like, wow, this isn't really the typical church lesson we have. But it was fun for me. So anyway, hopefully it'll be fun for you. So the interesting thing is, Jesus was accused of sedition. And so he was killed as a criminal in Rome on the cross. And then 325 years later, the Christianity takes over the empire, and he becomes the leader of, or the Christianity becomes the state religion. Let's see, I think Daniel's got a comment here that I can pop in here. It is a complex theology, but both sides would agree Jesus is God and man. The difference is whether we speak of one composite nature and hypostasis, which you're using big words now, from 2 natures and hypostasis or 2 natures. Yeah, it's definitely complex, and it went over my head. So anyway, so let's see, how do I go here? Click. Okay, so I didn't say this in my lesson. I wanted to, but I was thinking about it. So, like, when Joseph Smith was killed, the big incident that led to his death was the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor. So the big incident with Jesus was him cleansing the temple. And so you have here Jesus at the temple, and he's protesting the worldliness during Passover. It's a crowded holiday, lots of national freedom. And so there was kind of a collaboration with Caiaphas. He's the high priest of Judaism, and he's coordinating with Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman prefect. And Pilate was very ruthless. Like, he had to come down to Jerusalem because it was Passover week, and he was like, the last thing I want to do is hang out with a bunch of Jews on Passover week, And so he was probably in a bad mood and didn't want to be there. And, this is a time of unrest, and a lot of people are looking for a Messiah, a political Messiah to lead. And so Pilate was already kind of on notice that, hey, this is a good time when somebody's going to cause a ruckus. And then Jesus definitely caused a ruckus. And so that's kind of the stage that was set the week before Jesus died. So the cleansing of the temple led directly to the death of Jesus. And it was almost a physical, I think it could be argued this was Jesus's last parable, kind of a parable of destruction. So it could be argued that instead of cleansing the temple, Jesus was symbolically destroying the temple. But he was causing a massive disruption. He was enacting a physical parable intended to symbolize the future destruction of the temple when God would finally act in judgments against his people. And so he was protesting against the political collaboration. I think for the Romans especially, but the Jews to some degree were just like, why would a Galilean peasant like Jesus come here? And, and from their point of view, Jesus was desecrating the house of God. And this is kind of the central seat of the political collaboration between the Jews and the Romans. and it was managed by the high priest Caiaphas. And so, this was another critique of the worldliness of the temple. Jesus' actions likely served as an act of political subversion. That he was protesting the temple leadership had become too worldly, too Roman, and were caught up in the money of the day. And so in doing so, he echoed the critiques of other sects like the Essenes. Those are the ones who have the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they also protested the worldly way in which the temple was being run. And so the consequences of the cleansing, while criticizing the priesthood or the temple was not entirely unusual for a Jewish preacher, doing so during Passover holiday was incredibly dangerous. I'm sure Jesus knew this, and it was the equivalent to shouting fire in a crowded theater. And so it was a very combustible time, and Pontius Pilate wasn't going to take any guff from anybody. And so the gospel narratives reveal some different things. I think the interesting thing is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus eats the Passover meal before his execution. However, in John, there is no meal in John. So Jesus is crucified at the day before Passover, and it's at the exact moment that the temple lambs are slaughtered for Passover. So in a sense, Jesus was the Passover meal in John. He was the last sacrifice. From a Christian point of view, this is why we don't do animal sacrifice anymore. Jesus was the last sacrifice. So the original version of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, originally ended with the tomb was empty, the women were fleeing in terror, and that's where it ends. So the original Mark, the earliest manuscripts of Mark don't have a resurrection story. Now there's a resurrection story now, but the original Gospel of Mark didn't have it. And so later writers found this very unsatisfactory, and so they added resurrections to both Matthew and Luke, as well as to Mark. And so so this is really shaping the agony. Writers looked to Jewish Psalms. This was not historical reporting to shape his final moments. The Gospel of Mark depicts a terrifying death of abandonment. Jesus is depicted, in Mark, Jesus is sad and scared. God, can you take this cup away from me? This is hard. But in John, Jesus is in control. He's a serene figure. He knows that he's going to die on the cross, and it's just the apostles that don't know. The apostles just don't understand. Jesus is in charge. And so the Jesus in John is very different than the Jesus in Mark. And so that's pretty interesting. So it's important to remember, and I think most know this, but I just want to emphasize it. A lot of times, especially in Matthew, we always blame the Jews for the death of Jesus, but the Jews had no authority to execute Jesus. That's why they went to the Romans, because blasphemy was not a capital offense. And so we should make sure that we understand it was the Romans, not the Jewish people, who were responsible for the execution. From Pontius Pilate's point of view, Jesus was just a blip. He wouldn't even give two thoughts to executing another Jew, big deal. Who's Jesus, basically? And so the sign on the cross where Jesus was the King of the Jews was not mocking Jesus, but it was the official legal charge of political insurrection against the empire, because there was no separation of church and state in Rome. You were expected to, I guess Jews kind of had an exemption of, you were supposed to offer sacrifice to Zeus and Jupiter and Saturn and whatever, all the Roman gods. And so the Jews kind of had an exemption from that, but it was your civic duty to do this. And so anybody who claimed to be a king, Jesus did say, my king is not of this world. And Pontius Pilate was like, I'm going to let you go. And the Caiaphas was like, no, he thinks he's in charge of the Jews. And that is treason. That is a capital offense. And so we just need to remember it was the Romans who were in charge of the execution, not the leaders of the Jews. So the mechanism of death with crucifixion, a lot of times we'll see a lot of blood, but blood, people didn't lose a lot of blood in the execution. Yes, they did have, they probably nailed him through his wrists and his ankles to keep him on the cross, but it really was suffocation that killed people. It wasn't blood loss. And the idea was you would just become exhausted. You could no longer breathe, and you couldn't hold yourself up in order to breathe because you'd have to stand on those nails that were in your ankles and feet. And so that was very painful, and people would just, it really is a torture device. We're literally, the idea was we're literally torturing you to death. We're going to put this on a public road so everybody knows, hey, don't mess with the Roman Empire, or you're going to end up just like this. And so, a lot of times with crucifixion, they wouldn't bury them. They would just leave them dead up there for days. And, kind of as a warning to everyone that, don't mess with the Romans because, we will terrorize you to death, basically. So, this Easter panic after Jesus was killed, it definitely traumatized the community. They were anticipating that the Messiah, which they believed was Jesus, was going to take over the political kingdom. They were going to rescue the Israel from Roman rule. And so instead, the disciples had to hide in terror. They were grappling with the shameful execution of their leader. And so they had to, kind of put them into a trough. They had to reinterpret the Hebrew scriptures in order to conclude that the righteous one was supposed to suffer and be executed. And so then they got a surge in conviction. They got an unshakable belief that God vindicated Jesus by the bodily resurrection. And so the earliest accounts talked about a physical resurrection. Jesus wasn't a ghost. But he was physically resurrected. And so that became a big point of the Gospels, that this was a physical resurrection. It wasn't just, Jesus appearing without his body. And so that became a big, I wanted to go to, I think, one more slide, or am I missing that slide? I'm going to go to this one for a minute. We'll come back to that other one in just a minute. And so early Christians fiercely debated what was important about Jesus. And so there was one faction, I think we'll call these the Gnostics, that said the important message about Jesus is his secret wisdom and his teachings. They didn't care about the resurrection. They thought the resurrection was irrelevant. Gnostics believed that Jesus was so divine, he didn't actually take human form, which meant he couldn't have suffered the physical crucifixion. Now, one example, it was funny because I mentioned this in class. I was surprised that nobody had even heard of this, but about 20 years ago, the Gospel of Judas was published, and it was written in Coptic, and Coptic is an early form of Egyptian. And so Bar Ehrman was one of the people who helped translate that, and it was part of the National Geographic had a big thing. I remember being so enthralled with this. But the idea with the Gospel of Judas, it was a Gnostic gospel, a Gnostic Christians, and so they portrayed Judas as helping Jesus to get rid of his body. That, we don't want a physical resurrection. That's dumb. We want, the idea is Jesus had this wisdom and, everything, gnosis means knowledge and wisdom. And so the Gnostic Christians were saying the message of Jesus isn't the resurrection. It is the wisdom of Jesus. And so, historians have come up with a hypothetical source Q, and I've always wondered if the Gospel of Thomas is source Q. People tell me it's different. But the Gospel of Thomas is a book that basically says Jesus said this, Jesus said that, Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. So it's not a narrative like the Gospels are. So So a lot of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, especially, even John, have a lot of these sayings that some of them are very familiar to us that are in the Gospel of Thomas, you are the light of the world, that kind of stuff. But other sayings in the Gospel of Thomas, these are things that, if we said them, and I wish I had a good example, if we said them among Christians, we wouldn't be as familiar with those. I remember they talked about one of those in there. So that was the big deal. And so that was one group, the Gnostics. Another group, which probably became kind of the Western Christians, was the death and resurrection faction. And so they believed that the saving power of Jesus was the physical suffering, the death, and the resurrection. And so this became an absolute core of the faith. Key champions of this narrative were the Apostle Paul and the narrative writers. And so they didn't want to downplay the physical suffering of Jesus at all, because that would undermine the resurrection. And so the resurrection became very, very important. Now, there was another Christian by the name of Marcion. Now, he was a rich shipbuilder, and so at first the Christians were like, yeah, this is great. And so Marcion had some ideas about what should be proper scripture. And so he lived in the 100s in the 2nd century. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he said, let's just throw out the Old Testament. We don't need it. And the only scriptures that we should have, according to Marcion, were the Gospel of Luke. But not just the Gospel of Luke. He wanted to cut out anything that was Jewish in the Gospel of Luke. And so when the early church leaders, of course they wanted a wealthy businessman to help them out, but when they found out that he wasn't really in line with their idea of Christianity, they were like, here's your money back. We don't think this is something that we're interested in. So this is another group. The Apostle Paul talks about, if any other people come to you with another gospel, let him be accursed. And so you can look at the Gnostics and even what we would call the Marcionites as two other groups of Christianity that didn't like the resurrection and didn't think that was helpful. I think Daniel's got a comment here. I can't read it, but I'm going to pull it up here. Maybe I'll be able to see it a little bit better. A thought on the reinterpreting scriptures. Basically, all religious development is reinterpreting and remythologizing previous ideas. It's nothing any of us should be afraid of. But I think I agree with you. I do think a lot of LDS Christians are afraid of that, though. They're like, we've got the one way, and don't give me anything that's that I don't hear at church. So anyway, I had a member of the stake president there. I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. So we'll see. Let's see. I'm trying to decide. Do I want to go forward or backward? Because I know I skipped a slide. Yeah. Well, we'll stick here for a minute. So Bishop Irenaeus, he lived in France, and so he's the person who came up with the term Orthodox. Orthodox literally means straight thinking or straight ideas, and so he wanted to say, these are the ideas. So if you take all of these Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, Marcion's version of Luke, the Q source, the sayings of Jesus, secret sayings, and he said, you know what? What's the best? I even in 170, like he rejected the Gospel of Judas as just a heresy. So that clearly wasn't going to make it in the Gospels. And I think if any of you have read the Gospel of Judas, you'd be like, yeah, it's kind of weird. And so he came up with kind of a 4-gospel rule. He said, he believed the earth was flat. There's 4 corners of the earth. There should be 4 gospels. And so, that mirrors, there's 4 winds. And so he's like, the perfect number of scriptures we have should be 4, the 4 gospels. And of course he wanted to keep the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament as we would refer to. And so Bishop Irenaeus was like, this is how you think correctly. This is straight thinking. This is orthodox thinking. And do I want to go forward or backward here? Yeah, I want to go backward a little bit. So I know I skipped this slide. I wanted to go back to it. So the question is, when Jesus was alive, he was a Jew. He was part of the Judaism. And even after his death and resurrection, Christians, people who believed in Jesus, still considered themselves Jewish. And so when did Christians and Jews split? Well, it turns out that about 132, Simon Bar Kokhba led the second Jewish revolt, and he declared himself the Messiah. Now, this revolt was so successful that there are actually coins with the picture of Simon Bar Kokhba on them. And so the Jews were like, hey, we've got this Messiah. He's the political leader we were expecting. We've thrown off Roman rule, although not for long, because they finally did crush Bar Kokhba, but he was successful for a time. And so you Christians, you should join us, because here's the Messiah. You want the Messiah too. And the Christians were like, no, we already have a Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah. And so that's really, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, that's really where Christians split away from Jews. And so that's where you have the split, where Christians are no longer considered Jews. Now, in those early days, maybe we'll get into the persecutions here a little bit now. So you kind of have three eras of persecuting the Christians. So in the first to the early 3rd century would be the 200s. You had some sporadic, of course, we've got the fire in 64, I think, where Nero blames the fire on the Christians, and so he starts persecuting the Christians. The Christians are to blame because, if they weren't atheists, if they only believed in the true Roman gods, then we wouldn't have had this big fire. And so they were having some, kind of sporadic persecutions of Christians. Pliny the Younger, he had a policy. He wasn't going out really to find Christians, but if somebody was a Christian, he would bring them in. He'd say, okay, ask them 3 times if they're a Christian. And if they don't recant, okay, then you can execute them. So there's an interesting story about the martyrdom of Perpetua. I believe she was in Carthage. Yeah, it says it on the slide there. Yeah, she was in Carthage, which would be Tunisia. And so she refused to recant. And so, I assume some of the oldest Colosseums are actually in Tunisia. I have a friend from Tunisia, if you remember her. I can't remember her name. But anyway, she's coming to Utah again for the Olympics, I hear. But so they had a big Roman-style Colosseum in there, the killing of the Christians, and Perpetua was one. And because she just refused to recant, and it wasn't that they were after her. There were Christian people that visited her in jail, but she insisted that she was a Christian. She was going to die as a Christian. She was going to be a martyr. And so there's the story of Perpetua where she actually takes the executioner because he doesn't really want to kill her, and she grabs his hand with the knife to her neck so that he will kill her. So it's kind of a really interesting story. So that's kind of era number 1. Era number 2 would be the mid-3rd to 4th century, which would be the 200s and 300s. And so they would have different leaders would kind of target some of the Christians who were in leadership. So Emperor Decius, which was about 250, he required a sacrifice certificate. So you had to get a certificate to say, look, I've sacrificed to the Roman gods, Jupiter, Venus, whatever, and this will prove my loyalty. Now, if you were a Christian, you could bribe somebody to get one of these sacrifice certificates. So you didn't actually have to do it. You just bribed them, and then they'd be, you got the certificate. Okay, you're good to go. You're a good citizen. And maybe you'd send your Christian slave to get the certificate, but that was his problem, whether he got a certificate or not. So the Emperor Diocletian targeted literate Christians that were holding public office, and so that was about 50 years later, I believe. And then in era number 3, you have the internal purges. This is where Constantine comes to power, and so he puts the what we would probably call Western/Eastern Christians in charge, and he starts going after the other Christians, such as the Gnostics and the Marcionites, and starts persecuting them. So they are Christians, but they're not the quote-unquote good Christians. And so that was kind of the third thing here, a third purge of Christians. I've got a comment here. I really can't see these very well. I'm going to try if I can figure out how to do this. Zelig says, actually, I went with a former Instacart friend, Ben. He doesn't believe it, but he did fast and receive communion. The priest sprayed us with holy water and perfume. Oh, wow. So God loves great smells. All right. Interesting. So let's see here. Click. All right. So Constantine transformed what was a marginalized sect into the imperial establishment. So he started giving Christians money to build churches and basilicas, and it became the state religion. I think I mentioned it before, but if I didn't, he had a vision at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and he saw a cross on the sun with the words, "By this conquer." And so, and of course, they won the battle, and so that's kind of a little bit of his conversion story there. He also funded copying scriptures, and he gave tax exemptions for Christian clergy on local councils, and he integrated Christians into the empire. And so he really was, on the one hand, he persecuted the so-called not right Christians, and he helped the now favored Christians. So the persecuted church becomes the persecutor now. It's kind of a pragmatic motive. You know, whether Constantine was a sincere convert or a consummate politician, what he wanted to say, you know what, we need to get these scriptures figured out. So we've got all these scriptures floating around, and so that's what led to what we have as the New Testament. So he targeted the Gnostics and the Marcionites who didn't conform to the new state orthodoxy, and he began to help Christianity, his version of Christianity, to take over the empire. So it's kind of the ultimate paradox. Jesus starts as a criminal, and then his movement takes over the entire Roman Empire. So that's kind of interesting how he went from a persecuted minority religion to something better. So a couple of quotes from General Conference this past weekend. You know, Eduardo Ortegas testified, "He is not here, he is written," and that the empty tomb was a symbol of his victory over death. It's funny because I think modern Christians, we don't understand some of the things that happen there. And so it's interesting. I mean, we know that Christ was resurrected, but, you know, I don't think we understand the debates that happened in those first few centuries after Jesus died on the cross. Brian Holmes talked about Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone of the building, and then the living prophets and apostles would be established to be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine. And so, and then Dallin H. Oaks, this was his first general conference as the president of the church, and he said that the apostolic keys have returned to the earth, and we are no longer left to wander through the philosophies of men. Jesus is an active living guide for his people. Jesus Christ is the way. So the tomb is definitely, the empty tomb is the ultimate victory over death. And then, I won't play this now, but I did have a clip from Dieter Uchtdorf. And so I guess that's that. So anyway, I just thought that was really interesting. I do kind of want to go back to, because I had actually made this PowerPoint before I went to the Easter service at the Coptic Church there in Clearfield. And it was funny because I remember walking in and I only saw 5 cars in the parking lot, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to stick out like a sore thumb. And we just, I mean, it was pretty obvious we weren't members of the church. But yeah, I think one of the interesting things that Daniel told me a few times, so one of the things that the Coptics do is they pretty much stand for the whole service, as I understand. And he says, don't feel bad if you have to sit down. And I have a bad back, so I can't stand for, more than 15 minutes or my back starts hurting. But there were a couple places where I felt like I should stand, so I stood as long as I could sometimes. Another thing that Daniel told me that I thought was very surprising and very interesting, a couple things, because we were talking about baptisms. One of the interesting things about the Oriental, and maybe I read this, but I can't remember. So the Oriental Orthodox Church, Oriental actually means Eastern. So you've got the Eastern Orthodox Church. Most of us are kind of familiar with the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian and some of those other ones. As far as the Oriental Orthodox Church, they all have bishops or patriarchs. I think this is true for both the Eastern and the Oriental Orthodox churches. So you have kind of a bishop, or they would call him a pope in the Coptic Church. I took a picture. I was going to show that picture of the current pope in Alexandria, Egypt. I keep wanting to say Virginia, but there's an Alexandria, Egypt. And so they have about 6 of them, I think, Armenian. I remember my friend Jackson Washburn went on a mission to Armenia, and he's doing some studies on Armenia, and I didn't realize that was part of the Oriental Orthodox Church. Antioch, Ethiopia, that's part of the Oriental Church, and Eritrea, I think. I probably didn't name them all, but they've got about 62 million members worldwide, and so those are kind of. I was like. My wife works for Southwest Airlines. I'm like, it's like Southwest has a base in Dallas and one in Las Vegas and Denver and Orlando and all this. I said, so you can think of each one of these as a base, and that like the Greek Orthodox Church, so they will all be part of Southwest Airlines, but the Greek Orthodox would be like Delta Airlines. They're different, that helped explain it. So anyway, and then Daniel had put a comment in here. Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopian, Eritrean, Syriac, and Indian. Oh, thank you. I knew I wasn't going to remember them all. So it was really interesting. And maybe, Daniel, I shouldn't do this publicly. You can turn me down. But you got me so interested in learning about the Coptic Church that I was like, I should probably interview you. So I won't make you say yes here, but we'll talk. We'll message. If you would be interested in that, I would be very interested in it because I just became fascinated with it. And so anyway, so maybe, hopefully that'll be a good thing. So Daniel, here, the interesting thing, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the broadcast. He was out here because he had contacted me and he said, hey, I want to go to a Nielsen Naylor church, or I think you want to go to AUB, but AUB, Apostolic United Brethren, they've kind of closed down. They don't like to have visitors. But Nielsen Naylor, they were fine. And Daniel, I should talk to you about what your experiences were like there. And so it was interesting. So you've got this Coptic Christian interested in Mormon churches, and then just my conversation with Daniel, I was like, I need to learn more about Coptic. And my son was like Googling stuff and sending me stuff. And because the question is, because I asked about the sacrament and also about baptism. So the Greek Orthodox Church and the Coptic Church both practice infant baptism by immersion. And I had mentioned this to Daniel. I said, I've seen this video on YouTube. I was going to do it, but I didn't have time. Where they take this baby and they dunk him, once for the Father, once for the Son, once for the Holy Ghost. I was like, oh, it just seems crazy to me, And I know babies have this reflex where they're not going to suck in all the water, but it just seemed kind of crazy. And he said, yeah, they do that in the country of Georgia. Like that video is from the country of Georgia, and I'm sure it was. But they don't do that in every Coptic church. So I was like, okay. You should Google it on YouTube. It's amazing. It's a cool video. But they do, and then Daniel told me this interesting thing, that an infant, so they will take the bread and they will mix it in with the wine, and then the priest will like dip his finger in and give it to the infant. So the infant, so once you're baptized, you can partake of the sacrament, even as an infant, which I thought was interesting. But he said, because I asked about, is it open or closed communion? And he said, definitely closed. And he told me that in Egypt, that some people, I think he said it's happened a couple times, some non-church members partook of the sacrament, and they came up to him after the meeting, and they're like, no, you have to be baptized now. So I was like, no discussions, no anything. So he's like, so don't partake of the sacrament unless you want to be baptized, because they will baptize you like in your current clothes, whatever you're wearing. Like if you take the sacrament, you have to be baptized. I was like, wow. So I made that very clear with my son, don't take the sacrament. But we didn't stick around for that. I wanted to, but I felt bad for my son. But anyway, so that was very interesting. I think, I mean, I haven't been to a Greek Orthodox church, so I don't really know. Now I kind of want to go there too. And my son was like, oh, I don't think I've been to a Catholic. I've been to a Catholic wedding. I don't think I've been, maybe I've been to a mass. I can't remember. But yeah, anyway, so super interesting. So thank you for doing that. I just thought it would be fun. So everybody, today is Easter in the Coptic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church, Orthodox churches in general. And will they ever get back together? According to the internet, they're trying, but they've been apart for 1,500 years. It's going to be hard to put those together. So, and I don't know, Daniel, I would assume, I think Orthodox priests can be married, and I would assume that's the same with Coptics as well. So anyway, I have like a lot of questions that I'd love to ask now. So I think it's time to give away this book, Holiness to the Lord, by Jonathan Stapley, the Gospel Tangents Best Temple Book of 2025. And so I'm going to grab my thing here. We'll spin it around. Not very many people entered, so those of you who entered are probably going to have a really good chance of winning this book. And so here we go. Let's see who the winner is. Let's see here. What does this say? Greg Louder from Orem, Utah. You're a local. I could probably drop that by on my way to work. So if you're listening, Greg, or if you're listening later, I've got your address. Since I work in Orem, that would be fantastic. Lately, I've been giving these all to people I got to mail. So this is great. I will personally drop by. I'd love to meet you, Greg. Maybe we'll go to lunch or something. But yeah, Greg Louder, you are the winner of Holiness to the Lord. So congratulations. Fantastic book. So anyway, congratulations. So, as far as anything else going on, I plan to finish tonight. I'll probably be up late, but I plan to finish tonight. Oh, I think it's behind me. Where did I put it? Or is it under my thing here? Oh, it's right here. So I wanted to get this out a little sooner with March Madness, but we have here Game Changers with AJ DeBonsa. I know some of you don't like sports, but we're going to be talking a lot about sports. AJ DeBonsa, he's probably going to be the number one pick in the NBA draft, BYU player, and they got bounced in the first round. So, but we're going to talk about church ball. We're going to talk about Mormon missionaries teaching Nazis how to play basketball. Not a lot, but we've actually talked about that before. But yeah, Mormon missionaries actually helped Finland and the Netherlands, and I think it was Argentina, learn how to play basketball. And basketball is a Christian sport. So anyway, I won't give away too much of the interview, but I've got Matt Bowman on. That'll be our next interview. In fact, I will be giving away a copy of this as well. So if you didn't win that one, Greg, you're now disqualified because you won this book here. But yeah, if you want to win The Game Changers by Matthew Bowman and Wayne LeCheminant, I'll be posting that interview this week, and I'm looking forward to see AJ play in the NBA. Hopefully, the Jazz can draft him. That would be fantastic. So anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. Happy Easter. I was thinking this was a week late, but not according to the Orthodox Church. So I was happy that I could give an Easter lesson on sort of Easter. One other quick thing, really quickly. Why is Orthodox Easter different than Western Christianity Easter? I had to look it up. It's because of the way they do the calendar system. So under Julius Caesar, they call that the Julian calendar, you had 12 months with 365 days. But unfortunately, the calendar, it should be 365 and 1/4. And so that's why every 4 years, so under Pope Gregory the 13th, they fixed it because the calendar was off about 10 days. And so the calendar that we use today is modified from the Julian calendar and is now the Gregorian calendar. And so basically back in, I think I have it right, 1582, the Catholic Pope declared that the day after October 4th was going to be October 15th instead of October 5th. So he moved it forward 10 days so that they could fix the synchronization problem that the Julian calendar left because they didn't have a leap day every 4 years. And so Orthodox, last year Easter for Western Christians and Eastern Christians was on the same day. This year it was a week apart. It can go anywhere from 1 to 5 weeks, depending on, because the Coptics and the Oriental Christians, I guess, use the Julian calendar as opposed to the Gregorian calendar. And then it's based on the full moon after, because Jesus died on the full moon. So anyway, more than you ever wanted to know. But thanks again for listening, everyone. It's fun to do this. I forgot to mention, this is part of my LDS Faith Journeys and Gospel Tangents. And so I'll be posting this on my LDS Faith Journeys channel as well. And look forward to learning more about church ball and why basketball is the official church sport. And also a Christian sport. We'll talk about why it's a Christian sport. I thought that was very interesting. So anyway, whoops. Oh, actually, I didn't mean to click on that, but that's good to know. Daniel says priests can be married, and most are. In Ethiopia, all except monk priests are married. So very good. I didn't notice that comment, but there you go. There's your last comment. And I'll be talking to you later, Daniel. So fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you all online later on. Happy Easter. Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.